Not a lot of freeboard there.
No.
But that's a container, not a tank. So,
yeah, question. Garnet? No. I mean, again, it has to be hazardous waste. If it's not hazardous waste, then there's no regulations.
Plus, that's the picture we got. So next year, I'm going to add a little text box here, and I'm going to hide it. I'm going to say, in the back lot, drawing sludge from the acid production operation. See, there you go. See, that's where input from our class certainly helps us. We've been using that slide for 10 years.
Nobody called us on it yet.
No, not well. Actually, they did, but I'm going to forget what you said by tomorrow.
Well, you have to change it today then.
That ain't going to happen. All right, so there's more exemptions in various parts of the health and safety code, and we have the citations later. But take a look at these things. These are a lot of common treatment operations that a lot of facilities do. Solidification performed in the disposal container, right? There's a liquid or a semi-solid in the container, and before it gets shipped off to the off-site facility, they pop the top, throw in some rice hull ash or adsorbent, mix the thing around, stir it around, solidify it, pop the top back on. That's not considered regulated treatment. Again, process equipment, decontamination, and cleaning, not hazardous waste equipment. If you take your hazardous waste tank, empty it, and decontaminate that, that's not exempt. If it's a process tank and you're washing it out so you could sell it on eBay as a jacuzzi for people out of town, that's fine. Acid-based neutralization at food processing or biotech facilities. That was a big industry push. A lot of the wastewaters that are initially generated by those industries are corrosive. So they do initial neutralization. There's certain concentration limits in there. Regenerating or neutralizing your reverse osmosis or ion exchange beds, silver and silver halide removal from photographic operations. Everybody with one of these little 5-gallon Kodak photo buckets.
Those are getting rarer by the day.
They still have them in schools. You guys want to have some fun? Go do some inspections of schools. They keep the acid right by the base because it's alphabetical, and that's what they teach in third period English. Let's see, combining a couple of waste. Now, how about combining or consolidating 2 or more waste streams if there's no treatment benefit occurring? We're going to talk about that a little bit more. That's that wacky, are you really diluting? No, I'm just combining them. Why would you do that? Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. Passive phase separation, we talked about that. Aerosol can puncturing. Remember, that thing used to need a tiered permit. It had to be in certified equipment. Now it's universal waste. Puncture it all you want. Is anybody doing can puncturing that doesn't involve a 30-06? Do you find it, don't you find it kind of a hassle? Depending on how many cans you're doing and the collection, a lot of folks find it easier just to, throw the stuff in a can, get rid of it as a hazardous waste. But if you are doing can puncturing, it's a universal waste, no longer need a permit for it.
Steve?
Steve?
What about the small calibration gas with your size? Do they fall into the aerosol can puncturing realm?
Typically, those are not aerosol cans. Those are cylinders. And if there's anything left in them, it would be a waste. Now, if you may puncture those, but typically, the residual gases inside are not real amenable.
We're getting a no on that, Steve.
What?
We're getting a no. A no.
All right. Yeah, and most of those, I wouldn't feel safe puncturing.
Another question?
So we went to a shop and the guy has a big nail in a wooden stud.
Yeah.
He takes his cans, boom,
Yep.
boom,
Yep.
pours out the liquid.
Where does he pour liquid? As long as he's pouring out the liquid into a container. And it's sent.
Can in the dumpster.
Well, I think that's to be recycled.
There's
metal.
air quality issues
Scrap
on
metal.
that.
It goes out as
But
scrap
we're not
metal,
teaching air
universal
quality,
waste.
so.
Yeah, I actually had a facility that was doing something similar, but they were collecting the gases. They ran it through, they had it in a little container that they hit the nail through, and I went through literally went through a stethoscope tube to a 5-gallon bucket that was fitted with a cartridge from an organic vapor respirator.
Creative.
Yeah, give them credit for it. Anyway, benchtop or laboratory treatment of benchtop chemicals, and there's a bunch of, and we'll cover it later. There's a bunch of conditions on that.
Yeah. All these we go through in detail.
Yeah, and then oil filter, draining, or crushing.
Another important definition from the Health and Safety Code, treatment does not include combining two or more, this is where we go in stuff specifically.
Yes,
huh?
it is,
Now
yeah.
we go through
I
everything
know.
all over
That we
again.
just talked about.
Combining
Consistency,
two or
don't
more
start
waste
yawning
streams
yet.
that are not incompatible into a single tank or container for the following conditions. The waste is being combined solely for the purpose of consolidated accumulation or storage. A good example is I got an auto body shop, and I have waste paint, and I have waste paint thinner. My paint is a flammable liquid. My paint thinner is a flammable liquid. If I mix the two together, I have a flammable liquid. Why am I mixing them together? So I don't have one can of paint and one can of thinner. I can put it all together. Are they compatible? Yes. And then I can ship out in one drum as opposed to shipping out in 2 drums. So that's pretty reasonable, right? So I would say that's a good example of combining. The purpose is just the ease of management. There's no real treatment going on. And no real benefit to me other than the ease of treatment. I didn't make it a non-hazardous waste. So consolidated off-site shipment, and they are not being combined to meet any fuel specification or otherwise be chemically or physically prepared to be treated, burned for energy value or incinerated. So that's not what happened in my example. The combined waste stream is managed in compliance with the most stringent of the regulatory requirements. So if you took, let's say I have used oil and I have a flammable waste, and I mix the two together and I manage it all as flammable waste. You know, that's okay, right? Because the oil may not have been flammable, but it's compatible with the other material, right? And I have 1 gallon of oil and I got 54 gallons of flammables, and I just want to get rid of the drum. So I add the 1 gallon of oil to the drum. It's just ease of management. I didn't do it to get out of any regulations. So I shipped the whole thing off as flammable. It's probably still flammable, and it was all compatible. So the important thing here is you have to be doing it not for any other benefit than management, and you have to adhere to the most stringent of the different waste codes.
If a surfboard manufacturer gets a Part A and a Part B, you add them together.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah, that's a different
There's
story.
yet another exclusion for mixing of multi-component resins.
And it's also tiered permitting, too. So
Yes.
we'll talk about that.
We will talk about that.
All right, let's go on to the next.
Yeah,
Oh, look at it's you.
it is. I
Doesn't
have
look
to
like
remember
you.
what the animation does. All right. I got to check the audience for. Can I do the compliance school thing?
No. You have to say, no. All right.
There's pretend there's a training class that uses different examples. This is one of the examples that may be used in another tiered permit class that somebody may be teaching. But you have 3 process tanks, process tank A, B, and C. Process B waste is non-hazardous. Maybe it's just, rinse water without a lot of goo in it. Process A waste and process C waste are hazardous waste. And as part of what the facility says is their process, right, they crack the bottom valves and they put everything into an accumulation tank that then goes off to be treated as a batch treatment system, right? So process B is non-hazardous, A and C is non-hazardous. When it gets sent off to the treatment system, it's all going from that waste D tank, because D is a combination of A, B, and C. So is that is this a waste accumulation tank or is this a waste treatment tank? The facility says, and the other class material says, yeah, this is an accumulation tank. What do you think? And I don't mean to stare. It looks like you're peeling a head. I know, it looks very tasty, but it reminds me of some forensic shit, I got to tell you. I know.
Well, they shrink.
They do, as evidenced by the zombie lounge shirt I had on this. Is that an accumulation tank or a treatment tank? Well, they're putting in A, B, and C. B is hazardous, or B is non-hazardous, A and C are hazardous. What's happening in that D tank? It's being diluted, isn't it? That's a waste treatment tank. It's not a waste accumulation tank. So if you're looking at, or the facility is looking at, is this covered under tiered permit, they have to look at not just the treatment system that it's finally going out to. This has to be looked at too, because what's happening is dilution. What if they say, no, that's part of our process? How do you know it's part of the process or not? What's one sort of one question that you can ask? What's the benefit to the part? What's going on in A, B, and C? Well, we take a part, we're dipping it in, we're coating it, we're dipping it in, we're rinsing it. The part. At the point where they mix everything in that waste D tank, the part's off in the paint shop, getting a lovely coating of mauve or something. The part's already gone. What's happening in that waste D tank by them mixing everything together doesn't benefit the process. So, is that hazardous waste treatment? Yeah. What do you need to know about what's in D? Concentration, character, yeah. Yeah. But, be careful because, this is lost on a lot of facilities. They say, no, it's all part of the process. We just commingle it in this accumulation tank. Yeah, but things are happening in that accumulation tank that make a treatment. But a lot of them think because it's right near the generating process that's part of the process, and it's not. All right, so does all hazardous waste treatment count? I think you're getting the sense that it doesn't. One of the big ones that get folks out of tiered permitting is the recycling exclusion. How many guys went to a Charles waste recycling class? What'd you learn in there? Yeah, there's an on-site there's a number of exemptions, including an on-site recycling exemption. On-site recycling for on-site reuse, not subject to permitting. Yep.
Does the recycling have to go back into the initial process?
It has to meet the definitions. There's different ones. So we can't go into recycling.
Well, not the initial process, but it has to be used back at the facility for something.
Under one of the ones.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. But anyway, that's one way. And the more that you're familiar with the recycling exclusions, you may be able to help out your regulated facilities. And there may be a couple of things they can do to tweak the process to, one, better recycle their waste, and two, get out of tiered permitting. An on-site reuse, on-site recycling is a great way to do it if it'll work for their operation. Yeah. Not defined. Most people think it's over 50%. But again, that's recycling class.
Here's a good example on that is, there was a facility that had a 10% solution that was a hazardous waste, and they were recovering that entire 10% solution back and putting it back in their process, and the other 90% was discharged to the sewer, and that was considered acceptable recycling.
And who made that determination?
The DTSC.
Yeah, see, when it comes down to that, you get DTSC. So
it's not always greater than 50%.
Yeah, and it depends on the nature of what's being used. In that case, it was most all of the hazardous stuff that was being reused. Right. Now the facility said, hey, look, we're recycling and reusing 500,000 gallons of water a day. That's pretty significant. So we should get out of tiered permitting. 500,000 gallons out of how much? 4.5 million. Well, not so much. Yeah. All right. There's the use and reuse exemption. Again, if you could directly reuse it in the process, some kind of goo comes out of the process, and rather than treat it or ship it off-site, they're able to use that in the same or another process in lieu of a raw material. That's another big exclusion. And again, that's recycling class. There's a number of conditions that go along with that. Or you ship it to somebody else, and they use it in a process as a raw material substitute. Anyway, there's a lot of those.
Can you treat a RCRA waste?
Is he still working for DTSA?
I think he retired.
Okay. You may know who that is.
So there are exemptions under RCRA. Unless exempted, treating a RCRA waste is a full permit. So that's a Part B, not a standardized. The exemptions are in 40 CFR 261.4 to 7 and 264.1 and 270.1. Most common are wastewater treatment unit discharging to a POTW or an NPDES permit, and elementary neutralization. So that's where they make allowances for the food industry to not have a tiered permit. Remember, it has to be exempted from the feds before California can exempt it from tiered permitting. Otherwise, it would be required to have a permit. Totally enclosed treatment facility.
Now, keep in mind that sounds like a big operation. It could be a small little unit. Totally enclosed treatment facility simply means it's directly connected to the process, so you're not bringing a drum over to pour in there. So it's directly connected to the process, doesn't release any hazardous constituents to the environment during treatment, and it's discharged to a POTW or out to a point source discharge under an NPDES permit. That's what totally enclosed means.
A treater is a RCRA conditionally exempt small quantity generator. Remember, the feds don't regulate anybody under 100 kilograms per month. So if you're not over that threshold, then they don't regulate you. Does California have any quantity limits for a generator? No. So then California captures them. So the feds don't capture them, so they would be allowed to do treatment, but California would capture them. Treating in an accumulation tank or container within the regular accumulation time. And then empty container rinsing. So this is federal empty definition, not California empty definition. So that's different. But these are the most common federal exemptions.
And probably 90% of the treatment systems you see or treatment operations you see will fall under one of these. Like I said, these are pretty broad. Yeah. You want to do cyanide waste treatment in the accumulation drum in any fashion, it's not covered by the feds because it's in the accumulation container.
All right, so the Midblock reality check. What do we know so far? If you have a hazardous waste and you treat it on site and the treatment is not exempted, such as direct reuse recycling, then you probably need a tiered permit, but does that mean you're eligible for one? We have to find out.
And we'll open up the envelope now. You are wrong, treatment bread. All right, so pick a tier, any tier. Now we're going to start to get into, all right, well, we know they're treating, it's not exempt. Now what are they doing with it and what tier does it fall under? So again, we're going to follow the flow, right? So now you want to find out, okay, well, what's the volume being treated? And volume per what? Is that volume per batch, volume per facility, volume per day, volume per month? Why does that matter? Because those are some of the criterion on some of the permit tiers. So you do want to know what not just the volume, but the rate of what's being either generated or treated. What's the concentration being treated? Sometimes it's the concentration going in. Sometimes it's the post-treatment concentration. So you're going to need to get some data from the facility as part of the permit application. If it's how is the waste going to be treated? Again, what's the specific methodology? What's the process? And if it's a RCRA waste, again, does that treatment meet the RCRA exemptions? And the majority of them will. And then even more detail, all right, we know what they're doing and how much they're doing and what process, what kind of treatment operation it is. But now how many treatment units are they treating it? And that's a whole different determination. We're going to go through different examples. And it's not necessarily how many tanks or containers or boxes they have bolted together. It's a little bit different than that. How many treatment units do I have or will I have? And what's the bonus question here? Why is that a potential compliance issue? Because, well, a facility, private facility. You're a private facility? Your company? Who's a generator company? Oh, be proud. Just no one's copping to it now. They're like, no, I'm going to say I'm an agency, right? And the badges are printed so small, who the hell can check? All right. So a facility wants to do tiered permit treatment, right? So they fill out all the forms, attach the check, credit card number, ship it off to Santa Fe Springs Fire Rescue. When can they turn on the treatment switch? So when they get approval, when the fine folks at Fire Rescue come by to do the inspection, how about just 60 days after? 60 days after. It's like, well, they haven't shown up in 2 months. Bink. Turn on the switch and be happy and they're operating. Maybe the department comes by in a year and a half. As part of their inspection schedule. Hey, I finally got to your application. It turns out you're wrong. And you're not subject to tiered permitting. What has that company just been doing? Treating illegally for a year and a half. They don't have to wait for approval. So for you facility folks, you maybe want to go show up at the CUPA's office and walk people through it. Even if they can't really get to it in detail or go through the facility, big Uncle Steve's tip here, get a reality check first. That's kind of the problem with, turning in the paperwork and starting to operate without getting some blessing or review by the agency.
Right.
That's, for always an APSA check, that's one of the issues with the SPCC plans, right? People have been operating for 20, 30 years with their SPCC plan, and no agency has ever come by to look at it until you guys show up. So that may be a big surprise to them as well. Same issue. Yeah?
No. I mean, there's no approval on a tiered permit. It's permit by rule, which means that if you follow the rules, you get a permit. If you're doing a standardized or a Part B permit, you submit an application to the DTSC, and they will approve or not approve it. For tiered permit, you make notification, not an application. So you're notifying the department that you're going to be treating, and you're going to be doing it like this. The department will send you a letter that they have received your package, but they do not authorize. There's no approval or authorization in this. It's granted automatically if you follow the rules. I think that's a key thing.
And that's the assumption that you're following the rules. Now, you may have a local ordinance that requires that. Right, no, I know, but I mean the city may have a local ordinance that requires actual approval. But
I think that's right. But it's not an authorization letter. It's a letter that you just have received the package.
No, I think that's wrong, because I was just looking in your on-site waste treatment notification, and it says for the direction, it says generators operating under the CPR tier are not authorized until they are notified by the CUPA.
Okay. All right, so they get notified, but they're not being authorized. They're just saying that we received the package.
yeah, and you don't have to wait for the inspection. Like, how many of you guys do air permitting? You're familiar with the air permit requirements. Turn in your application, turn in the permit application. Typically, the air district, they have to come out to inspect before you're granted your permit. That's not the case under tiered permit. So the deal is whether you get the notification, the notification letter back from the CUPA. Still, after that notification letter, you could start up and fire up the process. Then the CUPA comes by at some point after to do the actual inspection. Because we all know there's often a difference between what you see on paper and what it looks like in reality. It may not be accurate. So it's just a caution for facilities. Just make sure, try and do whatever you can to make sure that somebody's given it a reality check before you fire it up. That's all. If you're comfortable with, yes, I know this is accurate, I know I'm correct, knock yourself out. And there's a whole lot of tiered permitting there's a whole lot of treatment that falls in there that's very clear, very understandable, very, black and white, but some of it's not yet.
Do you typically get a blessing in writing to say, yep,
Well, they'll send you a letter telling you, I forget the exact verbiage, that the package has been received, and there's no authorization. It's a basic.
When you get inspected, you'll get the inspection form. You get the inspection notice. The inspection documentation that they didn't find anything. When you talk, and correct me if I'm wrong, but for the most part, when you go talk to the inspector at the counter, you go through stuff. It's not like a plan check where you get the thing stamped. But you're talking with the inspector. Again, it's just a reality check. It's just a suggestion. Correct.
Right.
Right.
Right. And a lot of the real evaluation is done at the time of the inspection. Because a lot of the documents that you have to have for some of the tiers, you don't even submit to the CUPAs. You keep them on site. So they're going to be reviewed on site. Right. Right. Right.
Right. But the point is that even if the application is administratively correct, the facility could still be operating out of compliance. Because the paperwork looks good, but the backup doesn't support that, much like your tax form. And that, well, you mean the corporation's tax form? But that's, we don't want to belabor the point. I mean, you're going to get the letter, but, the facility doesn't really know that what they're doing is truly hunky-dory until the inspector comes by, verifies not just the paperwork looks good, but it matches what the reality, of what's happening out there in the field. And they have the backup and supporting documentation to know that everything's accurate and correct. Yeah. So that's a caution that we wanted to give.
If you get a different inspector or a different interpretation a year later, can they say that, well, actually it wasn't okay?
Yes, they can, and hopefully, as we sunset our tiered permit class, because we've been doing it for a decade, hopefully, like in any of the CUPA programs, there's internal consistency. And look, I'm not an agency guy. I pretend I am, but I'm not. I'm the evil outside consultant. And I always tell my clients, look, if you're getting a different interpretation from an inspector, that's where you be very polite. You stop and you ask to have a meeting with supervision, because there's some issue there. And there is a lot of interpretation in a lot of code, right? So it's not necessarily somebody's right or wrong. They're different interpretations. But you want to make sure that it's as consistent as it can be. And this program is no different than any of the others. Yeah. Okay, last question on this. And
It depends on the situation. I mean, every situation is unique. I mean, we've gone out to facilities and they filed PBR, and then we looked at it, and it was really conditionally authorized. They had mistakenly put in for PBR, and then it got downgraded after the inspection. So, it's case by case. It's we can't go into real specifics on how you run your agency, and we're still early on in this presentation, so we'll go into more detail. You guys are asking a lot of good questions, but we haven't given you all the information yet. So we'll try to keep moving, and we forget this. We don't take a look at it. I think we've got good notes on here on the notification process and the paperwork.
I look at this stuff all the time, but I have a lot of windows in my office, so oh, a squirrel.
All right. So where do we start on the flow chart? You got a process tank, you have a settling tank, and we've got a heated drying tank. So the process tank is waste A. It's a non-hazardous waste, okay? So let's say that's true. So that we've got a non-hazardous waste going into a settling tank, okay? So the process, we got waste, and then we have a tank. It's settling, so it is treatment, but it's non-hazardous, so it really doesn't matter what's happening into this, because whatever we're doing to it, we're doing to a non-hazardous waste, right? Okay. Then, as we settle it out, we've got non-hazardous waste to the sewer. So basically, we're dropping out the solids. And, this is a pretty realistic slide. We see this at a lot of facilities.
Not with those colors.
Never with these colors.
Except at IKEA.
But there's a solid buildup in this, and that solid buildup is a hazardous waste. And then that is going over here to the heated drying tank. So the settling tank sludge outflow waste B is a hazardous waste. Which waste is used to determine treatment tier, A or B? So yeah, B, because remember, A is not a hazardous waste. It's not regulated under tiered permitting. B is a hazardous waste. It would be regulated under tiered permitting.
Oh.
What happened?
I don't know.
Am I in the way?
It's a, no. So where's the regulated treatment actually happening? It's
Right
in the drying
here.
tank.
Okay, so they're drying, but they're adding heat. So is that exempted? No, because remember, you can dry using passive drying. It's not treatment. But if I add a heat band to that, or a gas dryer or something like that, now I've got a heated treat.
Of course, they could always put in a solar collector. Solar inputs. If they plug in the heater?
Well, if that pole is causing heat to the tank,
They're adding heat.
they're adding heat. So if it adds it, it adds it. It doesn't have to be in direct contact or anything.
Yeah, it has to be something, natural, ambient heat, natural heat, solar heat. There's some big schwitzy guy that stands there, and maybe that's all right. All right, so the flow chart in your book. Flip a page, hopefully. Hey, there it is. There's the handy-dandy flow chart. All right, so you go with the flow chart. It was the last major revision to add all the cyanide stuff. December 2008, it was revised this past July to correct some of the health and safety code citations for cyanide. It's basically the same. All right, first thing you do, okay, so now you know what kind of waste it is. You know the generating process. You know the treatment that's actually going to be occurring. You have all this information. And keep in mind, for you facilities shipping in your paperwork for review or acknowledgement, the more detail and the more clarity you have in there, the easier it's going to be for the agency to do the review. Anticipate some questions. For you agency folk, now you're getting a better sense for what kind of information you need to know. process flow, more information about the generating process, even the non-hazardous stuff that may be connected to it. All right, so you know what kind of waste stream they have. So the first thing you do in your flow chart is find the waste stream. There's 19 of them listed in their own unique name that's not associated with any regulatory name, right? So alum, gypsum, lime, sulfur, or phosphate sludges. I've had a root beer phosphate. And if you can't find, or if the facility can't find the waste stream listed, it's not subject to tier, or it's not eligible for tiered permitting. You know, you have to be able to find the waste stream in here. Now, just a little warning here. When you look at the flow chart, you know, there's 19 of these, right? So every one of these waste streams has a number attached to it, correct? On the flow chart. Then when you look at the Unified Program Tiered Permit forms, on the back of the form, or on the second page of the form, you're going to see all those waste streams listed that are amenable to that particular tier. And they're numbered. It's not the same number. So when you see alum, gypsum, lime, sulfur, phosphate sludges, sound like Foster Brooks, you know, there's a number 5 here on your flow chart. Then when you flip over to whatever form it is, alum, gypsum, lime, sulfur, phosphate sludges, it's number 4 on here. It's a different number. Don't even look at the numbers. It just gets confusing. However, when you look at the waste stream here, and say, oh, okay, it's going to be this kind of, you know, this permit tier over here. Then when you look on the permit form, or on the tiered permit form for that particular tier, it's a good reality check. You should see the same description of the waste. If you see it on the flow chart, okay, conditional authorization. Then you go to the conditional authorization form, hey, I don't see that waste stream here. Reality check for you. You may need to go back, make sure you were on the right flow chart path. And this number, it's not the waste code. All right, so after you figure out what waste you have, all right, now you go over to the treatment methods. How are they treating it? Right? If you don't see that treatment method listed, eligible or not? Not. That treatment has to be listed. Now, most of the treatment methods listed, they're pretty specific. You know, so one of the things that you should do is if you see a treatment terminology used, if you don't understand it completely, if it's not on the permit, if it's not on the tier, you may want to check back with the facility to get a better understanding of what that is, just to make sure that if you're saying it's not eligible, you really know it's not eligible. Because, you know, different people call different things, you know, gravity separation, phase separation, decanting, you know, that kind of thing. All right, so you find the tier. Then you look for any qualifiers. Yes, sir?
No. Oh, would it? If
Yeah.
it's not on the chart, yeah.
Yes.
If you want to do treatment, it's not on the chart. It depends on whether it's RCRA, California, whether it's a full Part B, or if it's a standardized. If it's, let's say it's a RCRA waste, but it's exempted by RCRA, but it's not on the table, then that would be a standardized permit.
Yeah. All right, then you look for any qualifiers. Now, for some of these things, it's and again, you have to look at where the qualifiers are. For most of these, excuse me, it chokes me up when I think about it. It's the volume coming, I don't know. It's the volume going in to be treated, not the volume going out of treatment, unless it's very specific that it is. So you look at this, you know, and you could look on your chart if you can't read the small writing. You know, for 3A aqueous waste organic compounds, they're distilling it. Okay, so at least it's the right waste stream, it's the right process. Okay, how much? Well, they are treating, jump right in, 55 gallons.
The volume, it depends on how much they're treating. If it's, let's say, they're less than 55 gallons per month, then it's a conditionally exempt small quantity treatment. And believe me, the requirements between this tier and this tier are huge. So if you're a business and you can get away with this, you definitely want to do it. Don't jump to the bigger tier, because that's a lot more headaches.
Yeah. And
But if you're doing 1,000 gallons per month,
well,
then you're clearly in here, you belong in PBR. If you're doing 60 gallons a month, take a look at, what are you doing? Is there a way that you could get into this area?
now for the CUPAs, when you're reviewing an application and they say they're treating 54 gallons a month, you maybe want to verify it. How accurate is that? How consistent is that? How representative is it? So that's the kind of thing. And you have flexibility. Is it average? Is that a statistically based, number? Same thing with concentration. This is the unless it specifically says otherwise, this is the concentration of whatever this is going into treatment. So this is where they need to use some lab analyses and representative sampling to determine what's the concentration of whatever regulated goo is in there going into the treatment system. And again, if these folks are treating waste that has 3,000-4,000 parts per million, whatever the compound is, are they eligible for whatever this permit tier is?
No.
No, because it's over 1,400 ppm. Same thing. If they come in with their application, it's like 1,350, 1,300 ppm. How representative is that? Or they come in and they say, look, we've got 1,800 ppm. What that tells me is that facility should do a lot more pollution prevention and source reducing up front. Maybe there's something they can do up front in the process. Raw material change, process substitution, to knock that concentration down, to get them into a lower tier. There's a bunch of other qualifiers. This number is an artifact from way back when, but are they treating 45,000 pounds per month? Less than 500 pounds per month per facility. Less than 45,000 pounds per month per treatment unit. So even more separation. Remember crushing drums? Well, the 66-261.7 exemption is if they recycle it, reclaim it, send it back to be refilled. Right? So if they crush the drum, this is from the crushing. If they crush the drum and recycle the crushed drum, then they're exempt, no authorization required if it's exempt. So this is a post-treatment qualifier. What are they doing with it after? So when you do that inspection, you're going to ask them, well, what do you do with the crushed drums? Well, we frisbee them into the scrap bin, right? Versus we frisbee them into the trash. Well, yeah, see, it has to meet all those requirements. No pourable liquid. Well, it's going to squirt all over the place. No, because if you're crushing a drum with liquid in it, that drum with liquid in it, never mind you're going to get squirted. That drum with liquid in it doesn't meet the 66-261.7 exemption. Therefore, it's not eligible for tiered permitting at all. That drum has to be empty before they crush it. It has to meet the
California empty, Mike.
California empty, not that EPA one-inch
Easy going,
nonsense.
RCRA empty.
Yeah, none of that stuff. Yeah, that's where Texans can make self-lighting barbecues out of their empty drums. Swear to God, 2 guys went to jail in Texas for doing that. It was over an inch in there, but they had a lot of RCRA empties that they were making barbecues out of. Great smokers. Anyway, again, some post-treatment conditions. If the recovered used oil is properly transported, right? So how do you verify this when you're on site? Well, let's see the transportation records. Let's see the manifests or the shipping records. If the amount of oil recovered is less than 25 barrels versus gallons, and the aqueous waste from gravity settling is non-hazardous. So now they have to have post-treatment analyses on one of the waste phases. So the flow chart's really powerful. And it really guides you to understand stuff. And for you generators or for you waste treaters in here, the flow chart is great in the sense that it helps you understand why you may be regulated at higher or lower levels depending on what and how much and how concentrated your waste is. And if you want to get knocked into a lower tier, which is always advisable, this tells you what you may need to do to reduce or source reduce or pollution prevent to get yourself knocked into a lower tier. That's a great exercise to go through. You know, here again, you know, over 55 gallon per month or per facility, less than 10% acid by weight. And now it comes into batch treatment. Let's say somebody has, and I think this is the acid-base neutralization one. Somebody has an acid or a base. They're treating, you know, 100 gallons per month. Okay, so they're not up here, so now they're down here. Let's figure out what the concentration is. It's 10% or more acid or base. All right, it's 11% acid or base. All right, so now you know you're down here. Now, how much are they treating? And they say, oh, we've got this great process. We neutralize it in a flow-through system. And we discharge with automatic monitoring. What permit tier are they subject to? They're not eligible. They're not treating in batch. Now, that may be an interpretation. You know, the higher the amount, the higher the hazard, the more complicated the process, the higher the tier, right? If it's a flow-through treatment, it's not batch treatment. You could probably say, well, look, because it's not, we're not treating in batch, it's treating in flow-through, you can almost inherently say or interpret it, it's going to be, you know, they'd fall under less than 500 gallons per batch. Because what they're treating is certainly less than 500 gallons. But that's an interpretation you may have to make. For flow-through systems, when the tier is based on batch. Yeah.
Our engineers kind of got snarled up in that a bit because we're continuously treating. But when you actually look at the unit, the waste pump comes into a surge tank, it sits there for a while, and the whole system's stagnant.
Right.
And then it hits the high level and it starts pumping and it's treated.
Then you're going to look at the surge tank to see if it's... Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds batch to me.
Yeah. No, that is. Well, it's a continuous flow into the equalization tank or into that surge tank. But that's the batch that you're treating. Yeah, that's an easy case to make.
But you're going to find there's situations out there that are not covered on the table. That the waste isn't anything exotic, but it's just the way it's written, it doesn't fit. What are you looking for, Steve?
Keep going. Dog's at the vet. I got to make a call.
So the end of the flow chart, see the tier, watch the asterisks. At the bottom of the flow chart, there's some additional stuff, and it can apply to your situation. The particular one here must be hazardous solely due to this characteristic. This is an acid-based neutralization. So it couldn't have metals in it that were regulated. So if there were metals in there, then it's not just a simple characteristic neutralization. Right.
Going back to the very basic determining the hazardous waste, is it because the California metal is in the water that makes it hazardous?
Well, you're talking about an acid waste?
No, I'm talking about an acid.
Just an aqueous waste. Yeah, well, it doesn't fall under here. She's asking about, that would be, if you look in the beginning of the flow chart, it covers aqueous waste with metals. So you always want to start at one and then kind of go through the chart and see where you get picked up. But if it does have metals, it wouldn't fit under this one. It would be a different one. So you have to find the proper tier. Going to the next slide.
See, my wife just retired.
What, you're busy now? What are you doing?
Rush has a bad tooth who's going to the vet today to go get his tooth pulled. So she calls and I'm thinking there's a problem with the dog. Now it turns out I copy her jam making copies for this afternoon's class. And there's 14 of them she was going to bring them by and I'm trying to give her directions reminds me, let's take our break. Be back at 10.
You want wait? All right. I was thinking.